Okay, so do we start? Hello?
Yes, Dr. We can start. We have around 50 participants.
Okay, so yeah, so good evening, everyone. I'll just run through what are the requirements for the FRCR Part One. How do you go about? How do you which study material needs to be read? And Dr. Ritika ma'am would be taking up Part 2A and 2B. She'll also put in her experience for Part One as well. So since you guys are here, so you have a basic idea what FRCR actually is. It's the certification or the fellowship program that is done by the RCR from UK. So it's a three-step exam where you got part one, part 2A, and 2B. So the part one that takes place, part one and part two can be done in India, and 2B you have to go to UK. So the venues for part one, there you got three UK venues, that's in Edinburgh, London, Manchester, and three non-UK venues, Dublin, Hong Kong, and in Calcutta. So this year in September, the exam was supposed to take place in India, but because of the COVID situation, they have been cancelled. So I believe the next exam would be in February. So this is the current status right now. So the exam is divided over 2 days. Day one, you've got cancer biology and radiobiology. You've got 50 questions, and clinical pharmacology. That is 40 questions. So the duration is 2.5 hours for biology and 2 hours for pharmacology on day one. And day two, you've got physics again of 50 marks for 2.5 hours, and medical statistics for 40 marks again for 2 hours. So the part one can be given in different modules, like these four modules that you have: radiobiology, physics, and stats. So you can give it in different modules. You can select one, two, or three, or four all together you want to give. That can be done. But each module, each sitting is counted as an attempt, and you just have 4 attempts to clear the part one. So you have to be very wise enough to understand that. What my seniors also told me was to give all the attempts, all the modules in your first attempt or your second attempt whenever you're giving it, so that you have a better probability of understanding what the questions are, what is exactly asked. So that's that about the outlay of the exam. So radiobiology, they ask you about the processes of cancer cell transformation, about tumor development. uh, Pharmac, it's the structure, the action, the use and evaluation of drugs in cancer management. For medical statistics, they ask you about the basics, and it'll be more of clinical oriented questions where trial scenarios would be given, and you need to assess the results, also how you come to the results, how the analysis is done, which tests need to be applied, and also about the epidemiology associated with the cancer. So that is what medical statistics is all about. In physics, it's the application of physical principles, also the methods that are used in clinical radiotherapy, and the physical basis of the therapeutic uses of radioactive isotopes, also the radiation hazards and the protection. So this last point, the radiation hazards and protection, it's a little different from what we've been read and we've been reading in our training days, as well as during your SR-ship or fellowship. So you have to have an orientation related to what is taught in the UK, what guidelines are followed in the UK. So this is a little bit different from what we've been learning. So coming to the first part, that is cancer biology and radiobiology. So what materials you need to have. So during our training days, this has been the Bible for radiobiology. That is the book by Eric J. Hall, and it's still the standard. The questions do come from the various charts that have been put up, and you do get a lot of idea about it. Nowadays, questions are being framed from this text that is from Lauren Pecorino. That's the Molecular Biology of Cancer. But this would just you need to add this book along with the Eric J. Hall to get a better grip on cancer biology. However, radiobiology associated with radiation oncology, Eric J. Hall is the standard book and the book to actually go by. The other materials, some of the students, especially in the UK, they swear by this book by Von Kogel, that is the basic clinical radiobiology. And I believe 2 or 3 years down the line, the books that there are on the screen, that is Lauren Pecorino and Hall, would be the standard. But just a few years back, I think Dr. Ritika ma'am also had read Selby and Knowles. It's quite an extensive book. If you do have time, I think Selby and Knowles gives you a very good idea about what molecular biology of cancer is. It's an excellent book, but a little bit difficult to revise. So you need to actually have good amount of time in hand if you're going and reading Selby and Knowles or even Tanit, that is the basic science of oncology. The other materials that include, you've got the Astro website. We'll share the link on the groups. I believe most of you must be having these questions. They're given by the Astro group and the exams that take place over there for the board certification. So the questions are quite similar what have been asked in the FRCR exams. So it's a good idea to actually go through these questions from the Astro question banks. The syllabus is what comprises for your radiobiology. It includes your principles of tumor biology. What needs to be read in the tumor biology in the initial chapters of Lauren Pecorino. You've got the various cell cycles, the basic cell kinetics, and the control mechanisms. Also, the mechanism of spread, the local invasion, and the migration of metastasis. These are individual chapters that have been given in Pecorino, and they're very important. Topics, especially the diagrams. Most of the questions that I faced during my exam, they were direct pickup from the diagrams that were there in the paper. The other things that are important in principles include your mechanism of DNA damage and repair, which is very well given in Hall. Also, the different types, that is the single strand DNA, the double strand DNA breaks, um, the potential role of cancer stem cells, mechanism of cell death, including your apoptosis, autophagy. So all these things are very well given. The initial chapters of Pecorino and even your Hall do help in that. Then the next part in the syllabus includes your genetics of normal and malignant cells, where you're asked about the chromatin structure and function, the normal chromosomal structure and function, then the types of polymorphisms and microsatellites, the DNA damage associated with the genetic changes that are associated in the malignancies. So all these things are important, and the chapter on in Hall, that is the cancer biology, gives you the very basics of all the definitions related to it. Especially the definitions and the mechanisms of oncogenes, the proto-oncogenes, the tumor suppressor genes, their mode of action. So all these things are very well defined in the chapter given in Hall. The next part is you've got the mechanism of cell growth control, that is the normal and the aberrant mechanisms, where you talk about the normal cell growth and behavior. You talk about the autocrine, paracrine, and the endocrine growth factors, the signal transduction. So this chapter needs to be separately read in from Lauren Pecorino. Then are your general principles of radiobiology, which are the initial chapters of Hall itself, where you talk about your cellular systems and the response to radiation, the parallel and serial organs, the principles of cell survival curves, the relevance of LET, that is the linear energy transfer, the OER, the RBE, as well as your molecular biology of radiation damage and repair. So the first 7 chapters that are given in Hall are of utmost importance. Especially don't dig in deep into the theory, but try to understand what the graphs are, because most of the questions would be clinically based, not clinically, but it would be more of practically oriented, where they would actually ask you about the better understanding of the logic behind the graphs or the tables that have been given in the various models of radiobiology. The other things that can be asked in the principles include your bystander effect, the molecular biology of radiation damage and repair, and also the chapter that is there in Hall towards the end, that is talking about the interaction between systemic anti-cancer therapies and radiotherapy. So that is also important. A lot of questions, not only in radiobiology but even in pharmac, would be asked on from coming from that chapter. Then in the normal tissue radiobiology, it includes your the various types of tissue damage that include your early and late, the concept of normal tissue tolerance, the understanding of equivalent uniform dose, the genetic factors and comorbidities, the autoimmune factors associated with it, and also the various organ tolerance to retreatment with radiation. So this is what would be included in your normal tissue radiobiology. Then the next part is your radiotherapy fractionation. Radiotherapy fractionation will ask you about the lethal, sublethal, the potentially lethal damage, the concept of early and late repair, the effect of cell cycle on radiation sensitivity, the linear quadratic model, the BED, the EQD2. So this part actually involves a lot of calculations. There is a chapter that is given in Eric J. Hall where you have all these calculations in one place itself. So go through all these calculations. In fact, even in the astro questions that are there, a few of the papers do have these calculations. So it'll be a good idea to actually have a feel of how these questions are framed and how do you need to go about in the calculation part. So not a lot of complex questions or complex calculations are asked because they don't allow it. It'll be easy calculations which are basic multiplication, addition, subtraction. So the other things that can be asked include your types of the various alpha by beta ratios, the types of fractionation including, that is the hyperfractionation, the accelerated fractionation and the hyperfractionation, the radiobiology behind it, the clinical implications and the applications of the same. And so this includes your various radiotherapy fractionation. The next thing, that is the causation of human cancers. It includes your the non-inherited factors that include your environmental, the chemical, the infectious causes, or your association with the different types of radiation, and a few important cancer syndromes that include your the Bloom syndrome, the Nijmegen syndrome, or even your the various genetic abnormalities that include your retinoblastoma, the Wilms, the FABP, and HNPCC, the familial breast cancers. So all the associated genetic abnormalities, the underlying radiobiology behind it needs to be understood, and that is what will be asked. The role of immune system, this is very well given in Laurent Pecorino. You've got a separate two sections that are there, which include your the fundamentals associated with the immune response, that is the innate versus the adaptive immunity, the different types of cells associated with immunity, that is your T cells, the B cells, the dendritic cells, the immune tolerance, the major histocompatibility classes, that is class 1 and class 2, the role of immunomodulation, the role of tumor-associated antigens. All these things are very well covered in Laurent Pecorino, and I would say around 6 to 7 questions would be on the immune system out of the 50. So this is how your the various topics would be divided. These include your 8 topics, and according to that, four, 5 questions from each system would be there. So next, coming to the physics part, physics is, I believe physics would be the most well-read and the well-understood part, because most of the questions, in fact, during our training, we do come across and do a lot of work in related to the physics part. We've gone to our machines, we handle the machines, do a lot of contouring, planning as well as plan evaluation. So all the clinical knowledge that we've gained during our training would help in understanding and answering the questions related to physics. Even if you look at the statistics associated with the passing percentage, physics is one of the easier subjects to actually clear. So again, so Khan is the standard book, the best of the lot. You've got various options, but I would say for FRCR, this book is the Bible. In fact, most the questions are in fact framed line by line from this text, that is by Siptain, that is Radiotherapy in Practice, Physics for Clinical Oncology. I think in all the groups these books have been shared. So this orange, it's also called as the orange book. So this needs to be read thorough. You need to read it from page 1 to page last, because questions can come from anywhere. And in fact, this book has been structured in such a way that the FRCR syllabus gets covered completely. Besides these two, some people actually go for the RAFIX questions that are actually the exams that take place for the medical physicists. But I never found those very useful because none of the questions were structured in that manner. But yeah, you do get a good basic concepts, and the clearance of your ideas do get a little bit better with solving such questions. But frankly, those questions don't actually transcribe perfectly with what FRCR actually asks. So instead of, if you don't have time, if you're really short of time, it would be better to actually revise SIPTANE rather than going for newer questions from REFEX. So now coming to the various uh, the sections that are covered. So physics relevant to radiotherapy, that is your basics of physics, that is the atomic structure, the atomic and the mass numbers, the electron shells, the electromagnetic radiation, the spectrum, the types of beams, the relationship between wavelength, frequency, and energy. So all these things, including your attenuation, the absorption, the scattering of X-rays, the attenuation coefficients, and half-value layer. So all these the basics that we've been learning from right from our training days are asked in the first section that is there, and it's very well covered in SIPTANE. In fact, the first two chapters are dedicated to whatever I have been talking about. So this is the first part. Then you've got your electromagnetic radiation and interaction with matter. I think Khan explains it very well, but yeah, even SIPTANE sums it up very well. You will be asked about Compton effect, the photoelectric effect, the pair production, the linear energy transfers, the secondary electrons, the scattered radiation. So all the questions would be pertaining to the concepts related to the AMR and the interaction with matter. So not just the definition, but the concepts behind that need to be understood very well, and that is what would be in the form of questions. The next part is your interaction of subatomic particles with matter, which includes your ionization and the excitation, the physics behind the electrons, that is the collision laws, the radiative laws, what do you mean by stopping power, the Bragg peak, the practical range. So all these formulas can be asked in the form of calculations, or even a clinical or a practical scenario would be given, and you need to apply these principles and solve the questions. So this is what is about interaction of matter. Then comes your radiation dosimetry, a very beautifully written chapter in SIPTANE. You need to read it line by line. They've given the concepts of exposure and karma, also the definition and the principles behind the absorbed dose. Various methods of measurement are asked in this case. They'll ask you about the ionization method, the chemical methods, the TLDs, the scintillation counters, the calorimetry, and the calibration that is associated with it. So this chapter needs to be actually read from SIPTANE because it gives you the UK perspective, and that is what they would be looking for. So it's the UK perspective, not the American or the other European perspectives. So that is the reason SIPTANE becomes an important book. The other thing you can be asked about the derivation of isodose curves, interpretation of the same, talking about the central axis depth dose profiles, and also the use of phantoms. So all these things would be covered in radiation dosimetry. Then coming to your physics of teletherapy beams and the physics of electron beams. So these are two separate chapters. I believe the chapters 8 and 9 or 9 or 10, I don't remember. But they're given very well in SIPTANE. If you've read Khan, you can just revise it from there, but do have a look from SIPTANE as well. What they'll ask you in teletherapy beams includes your the dose distribution with a special section on the isodose curves, talking about your percentage depth dose and the beam profile, talking about the various energies, the focus to skin distance, talking about the wedges, the tissue compensations, the build-up and the skin sparing effects, talking about the field size, the tissue compensators that can be used, and also the physics associated with the surface obliquity or the inhomogeneous medium. The definition and your calculation for monitor units, it's very well given in SIPTANE. It's always a good idea to actually look into those calculations just before the exam and understand, because definitely there'll be one or two questions that be pertaining to the calculation of monitor units, also discussing the beam geometry, including your field size definitions and the role of penumbra. Then coming to the electron beams, again, it's the percentage depth dose and the beam profiles associated with the energies, the tissue factors affecting the dose at depth, the field size, the buildup and the skin sparing effect. Again, the surface obliquity and inhomogeneities again come into the question when you're talking about the physics of electron beams. Then again, this is another, it's a continuous chapters that go in SIPTEN. The next chapter is the radiotherapy treatment planning, where they talk about the setup of the patient, how do you plan and how do you optimize your plan, effects of organ movements. In this case, your ICRU 50, 62, and now even 83. These three need to be read. You have to have a basic idea about these three ICRUs. Also, the methods of tumor volume definition, that is your clinical examination, the radiographs, the CT, MRI that has been used, needs to be understood. Especially for your ICRU 5062, you need to know what your GTV, CTV, PTV, your ITV, your OARs, your planning organ at risk, that is the PRV, all these things you've got to have a good basic understanding. And clinical questions would be framed pertaining to the same. The next thing is the planning volume localization, talking about the various investigations. Also, they ask you about the isodose distributions for various situations that include your single field, the multi-field, arc and the rotation therapy, and also the weighting effects. They too tend to ask you about the newer technologies as well. They'll ask about the conformal and the IMRT therapies. Also, the principle of field matching, the shieldings, all these things can be in the form of various clinical questions. Sometimes even DVHs are asked, the different types as the cumulative and your differential DVH, and also the principles behind your DRR, the reconstructed radiographs. So all these things have to be understood. Then you've got your beam therapy equipment, which includes your understanding for the linear accelerator, how the beam is produced, what are the different parts, what are the differences when you're using it for the different treatment modalities. Also the beam geometry in terms of the collimators, the applicators or your MLCs, and the influence of penumbra. So the other questions that can be asked in terms of your beam therapy equipments also include your multi-leaf collimators, a little bit in detail, where you talk about the edge definition, the leaf leakage, and influence of the leaf size. A few questions can come from the last chapters that include your principles of stereotactic equipments. The next thing is your QA. Again, a very extensive chapter in SIPTEN needs to be read from SIPTEN alone. You don't need to go into Khan and read it from there. The chapter is very well constructed. In fact, in my exam, I had two direct questions that were lines from SIPTEN itself. They talk about the role of computer verification, the manual checking, the monitoring accuracy of treated volume, especially in IGRT, the accuracy of positioning of your lasers, the light field, also the in vivo dosimetry. So all these things have to be covered in quality assurance. It's a beautiful chapter in SIPTEN. The next thing is radioactive sources. Again, a separate chapter in SIPTEN, which includes all your the types and characteristics of radiation, radioactive decay, the isotopes, different isotopes that are associated with it. Also the various types of isotopes used in teletherapy and brachytherapy, principles of afterloading and principles of brachytherapy treatment planning. So again, a separate chapter in SIPTEN. And the last part is your radiation protection. These includes all the UK laws that are there. So it includes your protection mechanisms, the quality factors, dose equivalence, the background radiation. So go and read this not from Khan but from SIPTEN, because you've got various principles that are associated, including your ARSAC and the IRMR, that is IRMER, which are UK-based law bodies. So all the rules have been given by them, and it's summed up nicely in SIPTEN. So always a good idea to read it from SIPTEN rather than Khan. So this is about physics. So radiobiology and physics don't actually cause a problem, because we've been reading it from our training days. What I found, and what even the others actually find a bit difficult, is related to pharmacology, because you don't have standard textbooks like we do for the other three subjects. So what the consensus is that you can read it from DeVita, where you've got the clinical pharmac section. Utmost important are your BCCA manuals, individual drug manuals that are there. The other books include your palliative oncology section from your Oxford Handbook of Oncology, and your ESMO guidelines that you have for your pain management and the various emergencies and the associated management with it. So this is the list of the drugs. They updated before every exam. So this is the current list of drugs that are there that will be asked. They don't usually go beyond this list. So at least these drugs have to be read thoroughly from the BCCA manuals, or if you're reading it and finding it comfortable from DeVita, it would be a better idea to uh, divide it according to these cytotoxic classes, and go ahead and read it accordingly. So yeah, so the topics include, you are asked about the mode of action of the various cytotoxic drugs, talking about the mechanism of action and the mechanism of drug resistance, toxicity of systemic therapies, that includes your dose limiting and the common toxicities, the mechanism of toxicities, what do you mean by acute and long-term toxicity, and what are the concepts behind it, and also the management of the various toxicities, also including your cytotoxic extraposition of these drugs. So this is related to toxicity of systemic therapies. The most important part in pharmac that is asked include, and in fact, in among those 40 questions, I think around 15 questions would be based on pharmacokinetics and dynamics, which include your interpretation of the data that is given related to pharmacokinetics and dynamics. So it's always a good idea to go back, if you've read it from KD Tripathi, the pharmac textbook that we used to use. So the first section, that is the basic pharmacology from KD Tripathi, in fact, helps clear a lot of doubt, and building up the concepts related to pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. The other things that can be asked include your definition for area under curve, its importance and its interpretation, the drug activation, metabolism, and clearance, the importance of protein and tissue binding, the importance of drug concentration and at the target sites. Then comes your clinical use of systemic therapies. So this is where your BCCA manuals would help. They'll give you a better understanding of what the clinical uses are, and also the various dose response curves, the dose intensities, the effects of single agent and combination therapies.
Ivan, crocodile open చేయిపో బేటా మరి కూర్చో అదే.
Yeah. So this is about the clinical use of systemic therapies. For supportive therapies, the most important things include your antiemetics, the list of classes and their uses, the use of steroids, the use of hematopoietic growth factors. Actually, this is the section where you get around 3 or 4 questions, and we are not very well prepared because it's not given in the list of pharmac drugs. But make a special note of that. Antiemetics, steroids, and your growth factors need to be read separately. Then you've got your analgesics and the pain management, where you talk about the outline of the pain management as well as the drug combination. How do you escalate? How do you de-escalate? And how do you modify your analgesic medication? Also, the different formulations and their use. It's given well in the ESMO guidelines that are there for the pain management. The last part is your drug interaction in cancer treatment. This is where again your BCCA manuals would help. The BCCA manual, if you look into, you don't need to read too much into the drug dosage. So the dosing need not be dwelled into too much, but definitely the other parts, that is the clinical uses, the pharmacokinetics and the dynamics, as well as this part, the drug interaction part. It's very well summed up in all the BCCA manuals for the individual drugs. So always a good idea to discuss it with the fellow colleagues who are preparing, and that'll give you a good strong basic understanding, as well as the memory for the exam question solving part. Now, coming to the last part, I think medical statistics for an oncologist, this part needs to be strong. And it's, in fact, if you just follow one book, that is this book, that is Medical Statistics at a Glance by Aviva Petri and Caroline Sabin. So this book itself will help you solve all the 40 questions. And I think Dr. Ritika, in fact, scored 38 out of 40, I believe, and I had 36. So, and I think we both can vouch for this book. All the questions were very well described and defined from this text itself. So the workbook, it's not really important. In fact, it will confuse you more. This is what was advised to me by Dr. Ritika, and even I found it the same. It was not very useful. You've got various statistical notes that are there in BMJ. If you have time, you can definitely go through it. I found it useful for especially for the last parts. That is where your understanding of the survival curves and everything was there. So understanding of the consort statement, it is given. You have a link, so I'll share that link. Just go through what the consort statement is, and just a section on the various clinical trials, the phase 1 to phase 4. It's given very well in this book, that is the Clinical Trials in Cancer, that by Gerling and Parmar. So just two books, and I think you're good to go for medical statistics. The things that they ask you is the various types of data, that is the types of variables, the categorical data, the numerical data in the form of discrete and continuous, the type of distribution, whether it's symmetric or skewed, the interpretation of bar charts and the histograms, the central tendency and spread. So this is what your type of data would include. For sampling, they'll ask you about the random sampling, the estimation of population statistics, the standard error, the use of confidence interval, and the ranges that goes into your sampling questions. Then the most important part is your statistical inference. You get a lot of questions. In fact, out of 40, I think 1/4 questions do come from statistical inference, that is explaining the hypothesis and its estimation, the type of error, that is type 1 and type 2, interpretation of p-values and your confidence interval, and the difference between the statistical and clinical significance of the various tests, and the correction for multiple testing, that is the false discovery rate or your one Ferroni corrections. So all these things are covered in your statistical inference, and this chapter forms the bulk when you're talking about the statistic paper in first FRCR. The next is you are identifying the various tests for comparison. This question, in fact, is quite commonly asked in the theory exams also. So this is where you talk about the various comparison of means and the proportions. You talk about the t-test, the paired and the unpaired, the Mann-Whitney, the Wilcoxons, the ANOVA, the Kruskal-Wallis, and the chi-square, the Fisher exact, and then the McNemar's. So I think all those who are preparing already have the chart that is there. If not, I'll share it on the group. It's a very good flow chart that is there, how you need to apply, identifying the parametric and the non-parametric, and then going ahead with the various testing parameters. The next is the association between variables, that is your the correlation and the regression analysis, as well as your scatter plots. So one or two questions do come from this section as well. The next part is very important, the screening test. So this actually is a very high scoring area. You get questions on sensitivity, the specificity, the PPV and the NPV, and also talking about the accuracy. So the screening test, they'll put in a lot of calculation questions, and you need to answer them thoroughly, because it's a high scoring part, and you just cannot miss out on that. The next part is your analysis of the clinical trials. This includes your designing and the roles of the phases 1 to 4. Like I said, you can read this from Gerling and Parmar. Then the other things that can be asked include your need for randomization, the methods of randomization, that is your simple, the block, or the stratified minimization part, the concept of blinding, the trial designs, the contents of a trial protocol, and the measure of response, which include your quality of life, the response analysis, and the various parameters associated in your survival descriptions. So in this section, they also ask you about sample size calculation. What do you mean by interim analysis? What do you mean by intent to treat analysis? So, and also the basic principles of meta-analysis are asked. Then comes your survival analysis. Survival analysis would include your Kaplan-Meier, the actuarial survival curves, and the methods of summarizing the survival data. And the other methods, that's the log rank test, the Cox proportional hazard regression model, the hazard ratio and its interpretation. All these things would be covered in your survival analysis. The last part is your epidemiological data, where the design, the interpretation of cross-sectional case control and cohort studies would be asked. The interpretation of odds ratio and the risk ratio. This is very important. You'll surely get one or two questions on this. Then talking about the definition and the understanding of incidence, the prevalence, the mortality rate and the standardized mortality rate. And there's a separate section given in Gerling and Parmar on principles of cancer registration. So two questions definitely do come from what do you mean by cancer registration? And so this actually sums up your statistics. So this is what your exam sheet looks like. You've got 2.5 and 2 hours for the 50 mark and the 40 mark paper. Just need to put in just fill in the blocks, and it's quite simple otherwise. So the key points according to me include start revising early and use the syllabus like what we've discussed right now. Make use of the available resources and stick to them. Don't try to add more resources. Be true to whatever you've read and try to revise them as much as possible. Refer to the reading list that is given on the FRCR UK website, and also read into the previous examiner's report, because the examiners give you, after every exam there is a report that is released, and they do tell you where the students are actually lacking. So it's always a good idea. Like when I was preparing, one of the point that was given was people are not reading about steroids and analgesics. So that is where I try to consolidate, and I definitely found 4 or 5 questions among the 40 questions in pharma which were pertaining to the analgesics and the steroid. You have various training courses. They're both in UK and in India also. It takes place in the month of January at TMC Kolkata. And Dr. Indraneet Malik sir actually coordinates these sessions. So you can contact and take a part. I did not attend it. I think Dr. Ritika ma'am also, I think she had attended it. So she'll give you a better idea. And while she's talking about the part 2A and 2B. So over to Dr. Ritika ma'am. I'll just stop the sharing. Ma'am, you can share your screen.
Sure. Just 1 second. That was very well covered, Vibha. It was a lot in detail, and I think it will help everybody. Is my screen visible to everybody? And am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It is.
Thank you. So I'll just begin. So now basically I'll be covering part 2, the final part 2A and the 2B. And so before that, I think Vibha already covered, but what exactly is FRCR? That is the Fellow of the Royal College of Radiologists. The clinical oncology module is what we sit for. It seems very scary sometimes that, it's a difficult exam, not many people crack it, but it is a different exam, I would say, and not we just have to know how to do the exam and the studies, and that's when we are able to do it. And the basic difference between this exam and our regular MD or DNB exams is this is not a competitive exam. We are generally not competing with the other person who is sitting an exam. It's a competency exam. Basically, they just want to see if you are a safe oncologist or not. And believe you me, they actually sit there to pass us, is what people told me, and I agree to it. So why FRCR, first of all? The obvious, many people are looking for job opportunities abroad as well, and it does open up your opportunities in UK. So although I am not applying in UK, but I have also got a lot of opportunities, and where they have told that you work for a year, and through a pathway called CSER, they would take me in as a consultant in the coming years. So that of course is a very big plus for people who are willing to migrate. And if not UK, a lot of people, Dubai or even Oman, there are a lot of job opportunities wherein your pay scale or your position differs a lot based on your FRCR degree. So I think those are the two most important reasons why people try to do FRCR. Then other than that, of course, an additional degree adds to your CV, and corporate sector at least does value it in India. And here I would just say, when I was writing my part 1 and I had met Dr. Sonjoy from TMC, I asked him that, sir, I'm doing this part 1, but I don't know what is the benefit, and, whether I don't really intend to move to UK, my family is settled in India, that is not an option for me. So he told me a thing that didn't strike a chord, that he was like, you will become more confident. And I was like, confidence ke liye, should I really write FRCR and put in so much effort, money, etc.? But then after you actually give your final exam, the final 2B, there is a different level of confidence, and I think it was worth everything that I put in for that. So that confidence, maybe every one of you will feel today that, you know, confidence is not enough a reason, but I think it is. So the another thing is, as I told before, can an average Indian radiation oncologist, fresher, just finished MD or DNB crack it? Or simply put, each one of us will ask, will I be able to crack it? I had the same question. So to succeed in FRCR, of course, we need to concentrate on the content and matter, what to read. But other than that, we need to understand what these examiners want from us. The pattern is not knowing everything and knowing the weird most fact about a particular disease, and you don't know this. Those are not the things they're looking for. To be very strict about it, they are just seeing if you're safe or not, you're covering the basics well or not. So I think it is very possible for all of us to do it, and that's why I have been able to do it. So coming to the facts, I would not use a lot of time speaking this. So components of the exam, as Vibhay spoke about the first examination, then there is a final examination after the first examination, and the final examination has part A and part B. They are again held twice a year, once in the spring and once in the autumn. For us, it is March and September. And centers for the final exam are not there in India. They are there mainly in UK and Hong Kong as well. This year, I think they have cancelled the ones in Hong Kong and happening only in UK for their people, but otherwise they happen in Hong Kong and UK. So coming to the part A first, there are basically two question papers, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, corresponding to their morning and afternoon times. And there are 120 questions each, so a total of 240 questions. And they are objective, single best answer. They give you 5 options. The answer sheet looks more or less similar to the first exam. And you have a 3 hours paper for 120 questions each. And you are allowed 6 attempts. Again, like FRCR part 1, you could sit to one or more attempt at the same, one or more module at the same time. Here you have to pass both the papers at the same attempt. So coming to what really it comprises of, so these are clinical based questions. We are they assume we are done with our basic sciences and physics and statistics. Clear that only the common cancers we have to know in depth, and the uncommon ones just straightforward questions. There is a division to it. I don't think it is important because we are giving the same on the same day both the papers, so we do not really divide our studies. But part 1 does cover respiratory, urology, head and neck, skin, CNS and gynec. And part 2 covers breast, GI, upper and lower, hematology, miscellaneous and imaging derived. In miscellaneous, they include pediatrics, sarcomas, unknown primary. What Dr. Vibhay did mention about the guidelines. These are ERMOR guidelines about medical exposure regulations. The DVLA, I'll come to it in detail, but DVLA is basically Drivers and Vehicles Licensing Agency in the UK. So they have a very strict rules as to cancer patients, whether they can drive or not. So all those guidelines. GCP guidelines, some basics about clinical trials and palliative care. So also it is important to know that when you are attempting the question paper, blocks of subsites comes. First, if there is breast first, all 10 questions will be from breast first. It will not be a mix up of one question from breast, sarcoma, head and neck. It will be a block of a subsite. This is, according to me, good because you can channelize your thought process in a particular field, and you know you're more focused. But this is also, in a way, sometimes there'll be 1 or 2 difficult questions in each block, which are difficult for everybody. So you spend time on that and you may end up missing an entire block. Like imaging based questions, I had like one of the questions I remember was an optic nerve glioma image and then management answers. So that's a pretty straightforward question. So you should not miss out an entire block just to solve those questions. And just a differentiation from the part one. Part one, you had 2.5 hours and 50 questions. Here you have 3 hours and 120 questions. So there's a big time constraint here that we deal with. And like all the papers, there's no negative marking. So what to prepare from? So like we had our Bibles for respective subjects in part one. The one over here, to the left, the Practical Clinical Oncology by Louis Hanna and Tom Crosby and Macbeth from the Cardiff group is like the Bible of part 2A and part 2B questions. RCR website also recommends this specialist training in oncology by Ajit Kumar. He is in Norwich, an Indian by origin. So his book also. So these two books mainly, and I personally I had read Practical Clinical Oncology the most. And then because we are giving a UK exam, NICE guidelines which are freely available on website. Now again, have put an asterisk on the NICE guidelines. You cannot probably some of you can, but it's very difficult to read through the entire NICE guidelines throughout. So I would say glance through it. So just a screenshot of one. So this one thing that is important, you highlight and keep, or make a note of that point and keep, and just glance through the NICE guidelines. You needn't read through it in detail for all sites. And plus, just some of you may do a course for all your exams. I had done for part 2A and 2B. So for 2A, if your course is very well, so if your course is has covered recently, has been conducted recently, and it covers all the recent NICE guidelines inputs, then probably you need not do that. So your course notes then replace the NICE guidelines, and if you have time, still go through them. So again, some of the things that you cover in part one or the first exam are still important. You have to know the ERMR guidelines. You have to know their some of the protocols about clinical research and other things which are not directly clinical but may have clinical implications. Again, BCCA drug manuals for important drugs are irreplaceable all through your FRCR, and I think once you start using a BCCA drug manual for FRCR, you will even use it in your clinical practice because they are so good. So BCCA drug manuals for important drugs. And there are two additional resources that I used during my exam. So they are two websites. One is Oncopedia by the Cardiff University, and one is a CCMO by the Cambridge Clinical Oncology Association. So they are basically paid sites. I don't know if it is correct to say, but we had formed a group and we contributed and took registration on that. I think that may be probably wrong to say, but we did that, and that can be done at a local level. So you can take share passwords and access to all these sites together by forming a study group. And they basically have questions that are questions similar to what are really asked. So I think solving them would be a very good idea to crack the 2A, because you get to know the thought process involved. Like you would think in a particular direction and their explanation would actually take you to the correct answer. So I think these two websites are very good. And again, just specifying here, we have to be very thorough with the time. 120 questions, 180 minutes, so 1.5 minutes. In that, sometimes 10 seconds go on, "Arey, pehle wala question to chhut gaya hai, uska kya?" So those time constraint is a very big thing here. So 40, you have to, look on the clock, 40 questions per hour, they should happen, or else move forward. And as I mentioned, don't miss a complete block to get that one answer correct. So move forward, and time in 2A and more than that in 2B is the big thing that you have to conquer. So the next part, which I'll cover a little more detail, is part B. Now another, just a point, I would say, in my experience, FRCR, the first exam that Dr. Vivek covered, was the most tough. Part 2A was easier than that. And part 2B, honestly, it was the easiest amongst the three, though most people have a completely different opinion of, one being easiest and part 2B being difficult. But I don't know, I think I have understood what they want and I would like to share that. So this is a really easy exam, I would like to admit, and like honestly it is. So it has to, first what is the exam and then what really how to approach it. So part B has two components, oral and clinical. I had gone to UK last year to give the exam, and basically it's a very that's also a very time bound exam. So we Indians are not used to, our long case goes on for 40 minutes, so we are not used to this. But there is an oral session and clinical session. In oral session there are 8 cases and total of 44 minutes. So you have 2 slots of 22 minutes. In between a half a minute or 1 minute gap is there. In that 22 minutes, there are 2 examiners sitting. One is asking, one is giving you marks, and one will ask for 11 minutes, cover 2 cases. Another, and it's not that if you have not reached to the end of the question, they have a set questionnaire. They do not ask as you answer like we commonly experience. They have a set questions and a set answers for that. So they have to move on at the end of every 5.5 minutes or 11 minutes to the next case, and the other one then takes over. So basically total 4 examiners examine you in 44 minutes. This is a computer screen based exam. I'll come to it in detail, but overall it will be a case unfolding itself over a computer screen with images and information about the patient. The second, so these are 8 cases, and the second part of the exam is a clinical exam group. So in a clinical exam you have 5 cases, each for 8 minutes. In those 8 minutes, you have to examine the patient, you have to give your differential diagnosis, and you have to answer the questions that are asked to you. Between each exam, you are given a 1 minute gap or a breather to, to calm yourselves and move on your focus or thoughts to the next case. Sometimes when there are many candidates, you may have a break or a rest station wherein you have 8 minutes to rest and think about your next case. But again, you do not know details about your case, so it's just a rest station. 2 examiners at each station, so your 5 stations, total of 10 examiners examine you. So total we have 8 oral and 5 clinical tests with 2 examiners at each. So total 13 assessments and 2 examiners at each, so 26. And each one at each station gives you 0 or 4, 0 to 4 scale, or 1 to 4 scale rather. So the total maximum marks is 104. You can there is only this exam has a clock ticking. So while you could give 2A at any 6 attempts whenever you want, 2B you have to attempt within 3 years of passing your 2A. So part 2A, the exam that occurs with the 2A, the final, that 2B is counted as first, and then consecutively in 6 attempts over 3 years. So after you have cleared that, you officially have a convocation, and this is my photo signing into the RCR register that I am officially a member of the RCR now. So how to prepare for this exam? Now these are just the same slides I had put before. So is there any difference in the material? No. In your approach, a lot. So coming to that, so approach is different, and you have few additional things, of course. So the thing that is additional is you have to know how to examine a patient. Of course, we have read our SDAS and we know everything about the swelling and other things, but there we have to be different for 2 reasons. One, we are not going to spend 15 minutes examining a patient and doing our entire systemic examination and other things. We have to be crisp. And second, the way they talk to their patient and deal with their patient is a little different than we are used to. Of course, private sector and government sector in India itself differ. So I would say how we speak in a private hospital would more or less similar, but like greeting a patient before examining, asking whether can I touch your neck, and all those things. So when I was actually trying to give the exam, I had asked a couple of people, and everyone had advised me that if you want to really not give many attempts, then better before your attempt you go and do an observership for a month or so. They easily take you, and you will get used to how they talk and how they examine, how they decide. So I think that is a good idea. I did not personally do it. The reason behind that was I had spent a year in Canada just before giving this exam. So I thought that I was more or less that aspect or that confidence that I needed to, go there and give the exam. I had partly that purpose was fulfilled, but otherwise observership can be a good idea if it is possible in your time frame. So, and what different so clinical, so this YouTube channel which I followed very religiously, and I would every morning get up and see those same videos over and over again in the last month of the exam, is Geeky Medics. It's a pan medicine website, but I would just to talk a little more in detail about it. So we when the clinical stations are there, it would not be examine the CNS, it would be seven. So questions are that pinpoint. It is not generalized examination. So these videos help you quickly examine, and within 8 minutes you have to examine and then answer questions. So some of the important ones I would say is cranial nerves examination, upper limb exam, lower limb exam, how to do a per abdominal exam, or dermatomal examination, neck rigidity examination. So these are pinpoint questions that are asked, and Geeky Medics generally has all these videos, and when you scroll through the list of videos, you even catch a few ones, probably this is important, or a bone tumor examination, things like that. So while you are studying, start compiling your list, that if this comes in a clinical case, how would I examine that? Is there a video available on Geeky Medics? Is something I followed. There may be many more. So find your favorite channel and so but then what to do, close the book, and suppose I'm reading prostate the scenario that they have built up, and they'll tell you draw the high risk CTV here. So you do not have your previous and next slice. You just have that paper, and you have to know what you're drawing here. So here they actually test your practical skills in terms of different from the 2A. And another different ways in 2A, you have to actually theoretically see. Here they will certainly give you 2 DVH pics and tell you which plan will you prefer and why. And they will give you a CT scan image and tell you why is this contour wrong. Do you think this is correct? If not, why? And if yes, good. Like nothing to answer. So these are the things that are differently dealt with here, and these are again although clinical or oral, but they're still very objective. There is a definite answer to it right there and there, and there are no ways of going about it. So example, they will give you this X-ray. This circle would not be there, of course, and they will tell you, they will give you the APPA view also, or AP view also, and they'll tell you draw the field. So they are quite general. They are generally, they do 2D. They like to the examinee offers 2D RT, and they would like you to be generous. So they would these are the things that, you know, they will give you just this picture on the left of head and neck and tell you draw the CTV, intermediate risk for nasopharynx, and on this right side there may be a node or not a node. Draw the CTV for CS cervix lady. So this is what they would give you, just a picture, and you have to draw on that. And so this is how this exam is different. And coming to courses, I would suggest here in 2B, a course, doing a course is a good idea. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention in it, we are also in Kolkata, TMC Kolkata is also now conducting a group in association with the Cardiff. So these are the groups in UK, Sheffield, Canterbury, Cardiff, Manchester, Clatterbridge, Edinburgh, and Norwich. So, and I had attended the Cardiff course, going to Cardiff. I was in Canada doing my fellowship that time, and I don't think the Indian course had started at that time. So I decided to go to Cardiff, and I think it was a very kind of a game changer. All that how to prepare and everything, that guidance came from there. And another thing, although I have not done this course, this one at Norwich, this is just a 1-day course. The Cardiff was a 5-day course. Generally, these are 5-day courses. If only 2B, then 2-day courses. So this skin course is a 1-day course. It is conducted by Dr. Ajit Kumar, who is from Kerala, otherwise, and now in University of Norwich. And I have heard it is a very helpful course, and particularly for us, because we do not see a lot of skin cancers, and the radiation techniques and the blocks that they make is not something that we commonly see in our residency or even in our clinical practice. So I would say, I do not know, but if we can arrange him to do a live webinar or something, because now webinars are in, it would be a very good, I think it's quite a good course and people recommend it a lot. So going to the next. So also, just on Google, if you put FRCR clinical oncology videos, they direct you to the RCR website, and on the RCR website, these first two videos, the clinical oncology final FRCR, oral and clinical, this is exactly how your exam will happen. For me, the person who was helping us through was also the same. So the same person was there. Actually, so it was very familiar, and these videos you should see again and again. And while of course you will see these videos yourself, I'll just brief you about the typical case. I have not prepared slides for that, but just in your clinical examination. So how it typically would be is, an example, I was given a case of a tonsil in that oropharyngeal examination and neck examination, head and neck examination. Focus on, so I figured out you have to talk while you examine is a good idea. So after doing examination, I found a tonsillar tumor, and then they were like, you can proceed to neck. You have to, of course, there are rules of, then you have to ask whether I can palpate and things, and you have to be constantly communicating with the patient, whether you're in pain, I'm touching you, are you okay? So all those things are different that I've not dealt with, how to deal with all those things. But generally, an examination overall should take about not more than 3 to 5 minutes. I would say 5 minutes is an extreme. Keep it as short as possible. And sometimes when you are trying to examine the lip and the oral cavity in detail, they would direct you that, okay, move on to posteriorly, and because they don't want you to waste time. So that is good. Don't feel bad about it, and quickly examine. 3-4 minutes you should be able to say that I'm done examining, because they need your assurance that please move forward. So then in that next thing, they have a set of questions. They would have, suppose, 10 or 12 questions. They would ask the same questions to everybody, and they will build up a story. So the first point they will tell you is this patient is aged, this job. And one of the important things in FRCR would be, a lot of importance is given to comorbidities and job description. Like those points are also important. You have to listen to what comorbidities he has, because that will determine whether you will give cisplatin or carboplatin, or what would be your doses, or anything change in the radiation. And also comorbid job, in the sense, they would tell you he's a singer with a laryngeal tumor, so would you want to remove out his larynx or preserve the larynx? So you will preserve the larynx because you want him to continue to sing. So it is a very in-depth analysis of your understanding the patient, and not just the textbook that you have read. So those will be the first information given to you. You have to understand. Then they will also tell you about some of his imaging features, or they will give you a photo again and tell you to tell what this shows. Then again, after that, be ready with a pro forma. Like if it is a tonsil and I want to do chemo RT, then make sure that in your mind, while you have practiced keeping the book closed, that head and neck, okay, chemo ke liye I'll do the blood counts and renal evaluation will be there. For head and neck, I will do a dental evaluation, I will do speech and swallowing, I will do nutrition evaluation. So I will do CT scan in this position. So kind of, because in the remaining 4 minutes, you have to answer 12 questions, and they should be enough to satisfy their that answer level. So you have to have quick proformas in mind, that this is it, this I'll do, I will simulate like that, I will contour on based on these guidelines, I will include these levels, I will give concurrent chemotherapy. And you may be thinking I'm speaking very fast, but probably that exam teaches you to that case comes, and you should, in your mind, everything should flicker together. This I'll do, this I'll do, everything should go on in a sequence. So that is how you should have your answers prepared for everything. Then they would open a CT scan image and tell you to contour something. You have to do that. There they will be strict with they would give you a node and a tumor, so you have to contour the high risk CTV and the low risk CTV. Plus you have to tell doses. So doses they commonly follow is 66 in 30 and 54 in 30 or 60 in 30. So you have to tell something that they follow. And of course you would know that by reading the books. And also the RCR itself, the Royal College website itself, has a lot of resources. They have a document on normal fractionation schedules in UK, so you have to know those things. I have also covered on all those things. What are those smaller nuances which actually make a difference when you're answering these details. And in the oral, how it is different is instead of the patient, there will be cases. So there will be images kept in front of you and you have to answer, and the rest will be the same. So some important pointers to the oral and clinical: reading images. Sometimes there'll be 2 images on screen and you have to read. Now remember, FRCR, they are not there to trouble you. The examiners will not put 2 images when there is information only in one image and the other is to distract you. They will not distract you. They want to talk sense, and they want sense from you. So if there are 2 images, look at both the images and point out what is that node or other thing that is shown in the other image. Comment on it. They provide you sometimes. I think recently they have started providing sorry, but the beta HCG normal range, alpha fetoprotein normal range, you should have a rough idea when you are deciding whether it's a seminoma or a non-seminomatous tumor. And another important thing, I think, in 2A and 2B is there's a chapter in that book by Cardiff on immunohistochemistry. So those tables are there wherein the cytokeratin 7 and 20 are the most important, and you have to know them by heart. So they will give you a histopathological description. It was a squamous carcinoma, and then tell you it was CK7 positive and 20 positive and things like that. And then you have to guess the site of origin. So that is something that is you have to learn, but it is easy after you do that. DCCA drug manuals, again, you have to know the important drugs. And as much as Dr. Vibhay said that you have to study the interactions and dynamics, one other important thing, and I think it is clinically also relevant, that when to stop chemo, when to dose decrease chemo. So they have these tables in the end of each manual that adriamycin, if this is there, this toxicity, then stop. Or in trastuzumab, in heart toxicity, what to do. So those are very good chemo based manuals, and you know all details practically which are relevant when you're treating a patient with chemo. Again, those fractionations that we use should be based on UK standards. There is an RCR document. Retreatments, re-radiation, again, they expect you to be safe. They will not expect you to tell you how much percent recovery and all. They don't want all that, but they just want you to still be safe and not again say a 70 gray thing or something. Treatment gaps is something that is very important to them. If there is a 4-day gap during a treatment or an 8 days gap during a treatment, they have disease categories like although rapidly proliferating tumors are category 1, there are intermediate ones, and then there are prostate like category 3. So you know, you have to know which cancer falls in which category, and accordingly how much gap is acceptable and when you have to dose correct. So that is one more thing. Again, DVLA guidance. So if a person has a brain tumor, and so when can he resume driving? So those are things that probably our exams do not include that, but they are very strict about this advice. And as I had told, you know, every site prepare a pro forma like head and neck, I told you. Also, don't forget, patient is young, you have to talk about fertility concerns. It is basically, they are seeing you, as I've told you, at a holistic level, that you know, you are not forgetting the fertility of a young woman with a cervical cancer. You have to deal with it. Maybe it may include that, you know, you have to lose your fertility or an ovarian transposition. There may be different things to it. There may be even coming to a point that you will have to lose your fertility for cancer outcome, but you have to put that in your discussion somewhere. You have to deal with an age of the patient, elderly, if the patient is elderly, chemo, how you are changing, the pediatric concerns, the psychological counseling you will talk about in pediatrics. They have a different guidelines for MUO of various sites, so that is a good idea to go through it in detail. And various palliative sites also are covered by them, so they again that would be there in the books. So another thing is, in your clinical and oral stations, particularly in clinical, 3 out of 5 will be skin, head and neck, and breast, and they will come again in oral. So these two would comprise 50% of your marks in the final 2B. So look for, be very thorough with them. Then look for post-op cases also. Not necessarily a breast patient will have a breast tumor. I had a patient of breast with a lot of fibrosis and an inframammary scar. So that was something they were happy about, that you know, some of the students couldn't probably identify it. And before you go into the, as much as I told you, be very crisp with the point, just before you begin on 10 seconds evaluation of, you know, is the patient has alopecia, or, you know, that points that he received some chemo, that could be the some diagnosis, some diagnostic. So basic general evaluation is a good idea. Hearing aid or cisplatin toxicity, so all those things, you know, you have to be vigilant. My case is just for telling, it was the clinical cases were a posterior fossa tumor, turned out to be a GBM for them. We began with a medulloblastoma like picture and went on to GBM. Skin mycosis fungoides, we don't commonly see it, but yes, there it is common. I have 2 breasts, one post BCS inframammary scar, and then over the discussion she developed metastasis and it went on to metastatic breast, and there was one another metastatic breast cancer, and I had a CA tonsil. In my oral cases, I had an MUO groin, lung, esophagus, cervix, and again some of the similar situations like a brain and a breast and a head and neck and an esophagus. Yeah, I mentioned that. So again, time management is very important. It feels that, you know, 8 minutes I will come to know what I'm doing in that. You really do not come to know. Just the clock starts ticking and you are just, you know, you don't come to know in the entire 2B where you were and how the time has passed. It just goes by, you know, you don't realize it. And as Dr. Vibhay mentioned, for part 1, examiner's report they give for various years are very important. Like, and especially for us, particularly for Indians or Asians, sorry, So one of the things is I would not call it wrong, but we are used to examining by fixing our hand over the patient's head and examining the neck. So that is unacceptable to them. They actually wrote in the examiner's report that, uh, some students from some countries would actually hold the neck, and it is bad manners in front of the patient. So they have their particular mannerisms which point to us that, okay, I'm not supposed to do this there, and probably, before you examine the previous 1 or 2 months, you can adapt to that practice. And if it still seems a little difficult, then maybe an observership is not a bad idea. But the exam more or less would be quite crackable based on, if you know what to do and how to do, and you have the material. So I don't think it is a very difficult way that way. So of course, I think I would recommend a teaching course, and about that, hard work, smartness, and probably a mentor, someone who has cracked the exam recently, or something. You can just ask. And generally, all people, like, I also asked the same questions, and I also had somebody I would ask all the time that, what if this case comes? So you have to have that one person who is ready to mentor you. So that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That was, as expected, it was quite comprehensive, very meticulously put. I think most of the doubts have been solved. We definitely have got a mentor for the future exams. So open to questions. It would be great if you could put in your questions, your queries, and we'll try to answer it. Dr. Siddharth, we do have a group. The FRCR group is there. We'll share it. We'll share the link. I don't know if you're not a part of it, but we'll share the link. Yeah, someone has asked about this question. Even I had asked, madam. Can we stick to NCCN guidelines for treatment approach? Ma'am, if you would like to take the question.
I don't think NCCN, because the way US approaches the disease sites and cancers, and where UK favors more hypofractionation, wherein US has not really adopted it, and UK has definite guidelines. NCCN gives you too many options. So I think NCCN would not be a very good option, I would say.
Someone has asked about, do they ask you about research trials?
So about clinical trials like Pacific trial, mentioning this, you need not know the name of any trial. You have to know what is the correct treatment for a stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. Like adjuvant durvalumab is now the standard of care, but you need not quote that according to Pacific trial. No, you need not know the details of the trials.
Okay. Someone has asked, how does one go about getting an observership?
I think I had not done a lot of research on it, but we all, or I could share, I could ask that person. I knew somebody who is working in the UK. So he had said that, if you write to the program director, they are quite welcoming. And I know many people have gone to do observership. So I think with some contacts, I can give the contacts, but offhand, otherwise writing to people.
Yeah. I think especially the bigger centers, like you've got Royal Marsden, you've got the Christie, you've got the Bristol Hematology and the Oncology Center, and the Clatterbridge. So all these centers, you've got the websites are on, and you have the institutes have got very good the disease management group systems. So in each section, you can actually enhance your CV with these observership in the field that you want to go ahead and get the thing done. So observership, like ma'am said, it's quite easy. In fact, you just need to write in to the director and put in a good what do you say, a letter of intent. So the letter of intent would include what you want to learn, what is your purpose of coming to the UK, what are the lacunae, what do you want to strengthen upon. So all these things, if you put in your letter of intent, the high chances are that you'll get the observership. You have to remember, observerships are not paid, so you will have to bear all the cost. And if you're applying, please apply to the bigger centers where there's a lot of patient volume, especially the Royal Marsden, the Clatterbridge, the Christie. So all these centers would actually give you a good idea about what the UK system is. This is a very common question. The prospects of an international medical graduate to be a consultant or getting into better position down the lane. Ma'am, your views first.
I think presently in the situation, again, honestly, I may not be the best person because I am not looking for a consultant position in UK. But I would say after passing my FRCR, I am approached at least once in 2 to 3 weeks by a UK firm for a job. So I think there are a lot of jobs in UK right now, and there, if I cannot go for family reasons, but if somebody wants to go, I think there are good prospects. Of course, initial 1 or 2 years you have to work as a at a lower post, but I was even offered a locum consultant at a quite a good university there already without any experience in UK. So I think the prospects in UK are good right now. They need people.
Yeah, especially like if you just cleared your FRCR, getting into as a senior clinical fellow is quite easy. In fact, there are a lot of opportunities that are coming up, and they'll keep coming up for at least the next 1 or 2 years. And once you've cleared your senior, like you've done your senior clinical fellow, you be very focused and very meticulous in how you go about with your things, and try to get into through the CSER system. You can actually get into the consultant post like my ma'am said, locum consultant again, it's a little lower rung. Some of them are stuck with the locum consultant, and then tried their luck with for getting as a clinical consultant. But few of them did return. But yeah, if you follow the CSER guidelines and how do they the requirements that are needed for that, so people have settled down as consultants there as well. The other thing with FRCR, what they demand for a consultant post is the MRCP. It does add value to it. So once you've settled there as a senior clinical fellow or as a locum consultant, the next target should be clearing your MRCP and adding it to it. The MTI post experience, no, it's not needed. The MTI post experience is not needed. In fact, you don't have MTI. You have the IRSI, if I'm correct. The MTI is more for the anesthetist and the radiologist. You have something called as the International Radiology Society recommendations that are there. So you actually don't need it, but yeah, if you're applying for it, it'll help you clear the exam, but it's not a mandatory requirement for your FRCR Part 1 or Part 2. IMGs are included in the research trials. Yes, they are. I actually, before I started my SRship, I had an opportunity to go to Bristol. So I actually dropped it because I thought I'll complete my SRship. So the post that I got in Bristol was as a senior clinical fellow, and it was in breast and genitourinary. And I was supposed to be a part of the fast forward result analysis. So the IMGs are definitely considered for the research trials. In fact, the post that is there, it's for a senior clinical fellow. So and research work is 40% of your duty assignment. So 60% is the clinical work, and 40% are your research trials, and like you learn about how you have to design a trial, how the trial is conducted, how do you conduct a multi-institute trial. So all these things actually go into the learning when you're a senior clinical fellow.
I think there's a question, do I follow UK or NCCN guidelines now in my clinic? I think UK. I do by
That's a good question, yeah. In fact, UK guidelines are very crisp and very simple. Like you said, the NCCN gives you even level of evidence of 2B, which actually confuses you. So UK guidelines are very
even 3
competent.
weeks behind the FRCR exam, I personally do not follow NCC, and I think they're too confusing, and everything is correct and everything is wrong. So I don't know what I can't really get the grip of it.
Yeah, opportunities in the Middle East right now, in the COVID times, definitely it's all shut down. In fact, for the last 1 year also, it was not that great. You did not have good opportunities coming in from the Middle East. But with the FRCR, your avenues to the other Commonwealth nations that include Hong Kong, Singapore, they also open up. So definitely, yeah, not just the Middle East, but even the other Commonwealth nations, your opportunities increase. Middle East is saturated right now. You're not getting a lot of opportunities. What like ma'am said, in Oman, you have a few centers that are coming up. In fact, you've got the Sultan Qaboos and one or two more centers that are happening. So that is what is limited to the Middle East. FRCR Part 1, computer based. I think the recent one is computer based. I'm not very sure. I
This
don't
year
know.
it is computer based, yeah. That's because of COVID, and otherwise they have a paper. Dr. Pepe had shown a answer sheet. You were given that, and you have to mark your answer with a pencil.
Caesar documentation preparation, I actually tried to get a head or tail of it, but it's very confusing. In fact, it's someone whom I had spoken to who had gone through the Caesar route said his file was for, it ran into 1400 pages. So you have to actually search it. It's quite comprehensive. You have to have signatures from not only your HOD, but your consultants, even your nursing staff for that matter. So it really is quite extensive. To be frank, but I just cannot guide you into the documentation because it's very vast. You'll have to look into each and every aspect. In fact, I can just point out two or three things, but there are around 30 more things that I'll miss out. So it's a better idea that you go through the Caesar website and have a look into it.
Is a part one twice a year or once a year?
It's
Dr. Vibhay?
twice a year. This year it's not happening in September because of the COVID situation. Otherwise, it takes place in February last week and in August last week. So it takes place twice a year. Any other questions? Okay, so I
Ma'am,
think
can I ask you something? Would you please throw some light on like how to apply for a fellowship in Canada and the advantages of doing the same?
Okay. About applying in Canada, it is a very straightforward path. You have to go to CARO website. Like we have association AROI as an Association of Radiation Oncologists of India. They have their Canadian association. So it is very transparent. All the fellowships that are available to international graduates also are shown there. You go click CARO on Google and go on the fellowship page and then apply. Basically, what they ask for is 3 letters of recommendations and one letter of intent, which generally speaks about your interests, your goals, reasons behind what you want to do and why you want to do. And the next thing would be a CV. And Ontario particularly doesn't ask for an IELTS, but otherwise the other states do ask for an English clearing exam. So these are the requisites. Again, there are some places which are little, the competitiveness is little different for different universities, but they are all there on CARO website. I would say it would be a good idea to apply at a couple of places and see what strikes, and then go ahead with it. The advantage, I would say, I did a fellowship in extracranial SBRT. So, and primarily I was doing a lot of CyberKnife work. So I gained a lot of experience in CyberKnife. But otherwise, you pretty much do similar to what you're doing here. You learn some new things, like I learned CyberKnife and some new techniques in some tips and tricks in otherwise in the clinical this, and it opens your horizons a bit. Like I saw the working of an MR Linac installation. There was a dedicated pressed SBRT machine wherein a patient would actually stand and the couch would fall on the table. So it opens your horizons a bit. You are aware what's happening in the world. You have first-hand experience on what people are thinking, what research ideas they have. So overall, I think it changes your approach and your perspective. It broadens your perspective, if that that can be a point. So I think that apart from the clinical gains, for me, CyberKnife was something that I had no experience in before, but after now, I think deal with SBRT much more comfortably.
And ma'am, also, like, is there any? Do they give any options for having a permanent job over there? Like, what is the exactly the method to migrate to Canada? Like, is there?
Migrate to Canada again because I had obligations to return. I did not find much about it, but I know some fellows. It is not. It was a lot easier 5 years back. I would say I have seen many or an equal number settling. So basically, what they would do is do fellowships for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and then once your fellowship chief is also happy with your work, then you approach people for. Sometimes, very luckily, some people have escaped a residency there, but many of them do repeat a residency, their certification, full 5 years of degree, and then get a job. So I think where I was doing my fellowship at Ottawa, there's Dr. Vimoj Nair. He's one of those lucky people and brilliant people. He's brilliant. So who had to actually, he was so impressive that they allowed him to forego his training, 5 years training. But I think that's quite rare. But if you're willing to give in those years, Canada is a wonderful place, I would say.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so there are no more questions, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your experience and uh, putting across your views for FRCR exams and the future prospects beyond it. We would love to actually hear more from you and get you involved in more of the sessions that we actually have.
Sure, that would be good. Thank you, Vibha.
Thank you, Dr. Riddhi. So we'll end the session.
Yeah, Dr. Vibha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, ma'am.